Welcome to Denver Community Church Online. My name is John Gettings, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. Whether you attend one of our Denver locations on a Sunday or listen online, our hope is to be a group of people who are a just, generous community, practicing love in the ways of Jesus. As you listen to this teaching, allow it to begin a conversation with you and God, you and the Bible, and you and your community. If you have any questions about this teaching or DCC, email us. And if you'd like to help financially support our community and our partners as we give away 20% of every dollar that comes in, you can text Denver Church to 77977. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be together. Chad said it, Joel said it, and we're seeing it too.
Yep.
My name is Scott Oppliger. I'm the neighborhood pastor at our Wash Park location, so it's really good to be here. I don't get a chance to be here much, so it's really good to be here.
I'm Paige. I'm one of the pastoral residents this year, and I'm here quite frequently, so good to be here again.
Yeah. So we're excited to be here together, and we're going to be kind of going back and forth with some discussion and sharing some scripture, some ideas, and we just hope this becomes something you can really engage with us on. And one of the reasons we decided to do this together is because we're so much alike. Yeah, you can see this is going already, right?
Okay,
yeah. We're both on staff with Denver Community Church.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Okay.
But there's a few differžances.
I've thought about getting a tattoo.
Yes, which you still can.
Okay. I use words like dope and sick, just probably in a different way you do.
True.
Some of you didn't get that, sorry.
I am a woman of color.
I'm a man.
Yep.
White.
Right.
Baby boomer.
Millennial.
Yeah, married for a long time.
Single.
Okay. Farmer, Nebraska is where I grew up.
California suburbs.
Yeah, so the reason actually we're teaching you guys is because we are so different. And even though we're very different, we want to bring kind of two perspectives of life into one topic. And so we're in our second week of Lent. And I'm really excited about this journey that we're on during Lent to explore more about who God is. And we didn't plan it this way at all, but I don't think it's a coincidence. Today is International Women's Day. Okay, anybody? You know what this is? Oh my God, we got to get with it here. This is an equal sign, and so their hashtag this year, that's been going on since 1911, is each for equal. So this is an equal sign, each of us for equal. And again, I don't think it's a coincidence because today, I think what we're going to talk about and share from God's Word will honor and celebrate women in a way that you won't hear anywhere else. So I'm looking forward to what we have to talk about today.
Yes. So last week we explored the questions, who is God or what is God like? And we were able to solve the divine mystery in 30 minutes.
Well, if you were here, Michael taught, he's really good, but he's not quite that good, so
True.
We didn't solve it.
But we did move towards a recognition that all language is pointing towards something. So our words create pictures or symbols that attempt to describe what it is we're trying to describe. And so these metaphors are helpful because they give us something that we can fasten our imaginations to, but of course there are limitations, especially when we're talking about something as vast as the divine. I mean, how could we possibly have metaphors that can fully capture this infinite and boundless God? So we try our best and we say things like, God is a lamb, or God is like a shepherd. But if you didn't grow up on a farm,
like I did,
or you don't live in an agricultural society, that one you might struggle with.
Yeah. So when we look at this whole idea, I have a friend years ago that said, if you're just trying to figure out who God is, it's like walking in your barefoot through the grass on a lawn, and when you stop, an ant bumps up into your big toe and tries to figure out what you're like as a human. That's kind of like us trying to figure out God. If he had not decided to reveal who he is to us. And so you can look at nature. You look at the mountains, the sky, the universe, the oceans, and you have this sense of grandeur and majesty, and the God who created that. And then, well, of course, we have this thing called the Bible, where in some mysterious way, God has let us know about who he is through this book. And then probably one of the clearest ways is through Jesus himself. As the face of God, we can learn what God is like. And there's one other place we're going to look at this morning, but I think sometimes we kind of get it backwards. So if you want to turn to Genesis 1, it's really hard to find. It's the first page. Actually, there's too much introduction stuff in this Bible. It actually is hard to find. So page 1, Genesis 1. We're going to look at creation of humans, of Homo sapiens here. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And then jump down to verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Like I said, I think a lot of times theologians use this passage to try to figure out what we're like as humans. We kind of have a sense of who God is, so let's figure out who we are as humans because we're in the image and likeness of God. But this morning we're going to kind of flip the script here. Instead of trying to figure out what we're like, we want to figure out a little bit more what God is like. And so it's almost like God said, I'm going to make these people, and almost looking at the angels and saying, hey, if you want to know what I'm like, look at them, because they're going to act like I act, they're going to think like I think, they're going to relate, because they're in my image and my likeness. And I don't know about you, but there's no asterisk in my Bible when it says that God created them male and female. There's not an asterisk that says, well, mostly male. It doesn't say that. We are created in the image of God as male and female. And because we reflect who God is, we can see more of who God is by examining who we are as people.
Right. So our hope today is that we expand our vision of God, who is neither male or female, but simply is being. And our names for God matter because they help draw us closer or they can create barriers. So we want to make room today to encounter the God as the divine presence who is pictured as feminine in origin. So we're going to look at some of those scriptures and see.
As I've been studying this the last few months, I've learned a lot, and there's this thread throughout Scripture of that exact point. So let's look at the first one in Exodus 40. In Exodus 40, we have this fantastic picture of what is the reality for the children of Israel. They've escaped Egypt after being in slavery. They're now wandering in the desert. God picked Moses to lead them. And as they're in the desert, Moses is doing all the things he's supposed to do to keep worship of God alive. And so God told him to make a tent. And this is what it talks about here in verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Tabernacle was a little building inside this tent area. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So fortunately, someone had an iPhone that day. They took a couple of pictures. So this is one of the cloud. You can kind of see this artist rendition of what this was like. And then you have the fire. And there's a lot in this little description, but you can see the little building in the middle there. That's the tabernacle. And inside the tabernacle was the ark. Yes, think Indiana Jones, right? We knew where it was back then. And so that ark was a special place. And for the people of Israel, that's where God was. God was there. He was in the cloud. He was in the fire. He was in all his glory inside this tabernacle. And it says that Moses could not go into that little tabernacle. Do you know why? Because if he walked in there, he would die because of the overwhelming nature of God's glory. Now, when we speak of this word glory, it comes from a Hebrew word meaning weight or heavy. And it's this idea of someone, if you've ever been in a room where someone famous walks in, like I've been in a room with Michael Jordan, and walks in, it's like everyone just kind of gasps and looks, and he's just a human. So think about the glory and majesty and magnificence and the power of God and all that God is being present. That's what that tabernacle was. And so we have this sense of seeing this. And what we want to do this morning is kind of put a little twist on this whole idea of the glory of God. And I think, at least for me, think of it in a little different way.
Right. So the glory that is named and described in this passage is Shekinah. And the etymology of that word comes from the Hebrew word, which means to reside or to permanently dwell. And it was used by 1st and 2nd century Jews to describe God's presence among people. So we have come to say that the Shekinah is a dweller, to dwell with or a dweller within. And another way we can describe it is that the Shekinah is this visible or embodied manifestation of God's presence in all of the earth. And so, as we saw with the cloud and the fire, those are visible ways that God is appearing in glory. So you might be wondering now, okay, got it, but how does that fit in with the divine feminine? Glad you asked. In the original language, this word Shekinah is distinctly gendered feminine, and that matters.
Yeah, it matters a lot. I want to read something that describes this to give you an idea of why it matters so much. In both the Hebrew and Aramaic languages, the subject plays a much greater role than it does in the Indo-European languages like our own. Whereas in English, we could hear the Shekinah stood up and spoke without in any way detecting gender. In Semitic languages, because nouns, verbs, and adjectives all have separate male and female forms, both of the verbs, stood and spoke, would have been reinforcing the femininity of the feminine noun Shekinah.
So Shekinah is a feminine image of God, God's presence among her people. And so we use those pronouns she and her because the scriptures, the language alludes to them. And so we're going to explore that a little bit more today.
Yeah, and I think it's remarkable that starting almost 2,000 years ago, Jewish rabbis and theologians came upon this thought and started calling this glory, the Shekinah glory, with that feminine word. And I think there's some reasons for it that aren't obvious. And one of them is in this whole picture of the Exodus, when the children of Israel leave Egypt, follow me with the imagery here. They go through the Red Sea, so that they're in the water and they come out for a new life. Sounds a bit like birth. And then as the children of Israel are wandering around, God feeds them with manna. And manna is a substance, it's the only thing you need to survive on. It's fully nutritious, and only God can provide it. Sound familiar for a little baby? And then the cloud and the fire are actually, some theologians say it's a way of protection. The cloud provided shade during the day in the heat of the desert, and at night the fire provided warmth. So there's warmth and protection. And what's interesting is the cloud and the fire God led them all the way until they hit the promised land, and then there was no more cloud, no more fire, almost like, well, you're now out of the house, you're now on your own, go. So this symbol of birth and nursing and being cared for and guided, or being led and directed and then sent off is another reason why theologians have said there's a feminine aspect to God that we see in this glory.
Right. So we've noticed the divine presence comes to us in ways that are visible and ways that are embodied. So where else can we look to in the scriptures to see this Shekinah glory?
One is a temple, as you're going to mention here. The tabernacle we just talked about, again, God's presence was there. And so we have this sense of throughout the scripture there are these examples of God's presence in a visible way and an embodied way. So tabernacle we just talked about is one of them.
So God's presence fills the tabernacle. And then we have the temple. So we're going to fast forward to the time of Israel's first monarchs. And King David at the time proposed to God, I want to make a permanent dwelling for you, or a temple. And so this is what he says in 2 Samuel. Look, I am living in a bougie palace made of cedar wood, but the ark of God is in a tent. That ain't right. My translation, you are welcome.
By the way, Paige is developing a whole translation.
I am in seminary, so.
Yeah.
But God responds to the prophet Nathan in 2 Samuel and says this. This is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. and I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all of the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers who I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" So God seems to be saying, I'm a God on the move. I can't be contained by a building. And regardless, though, we have King Solomon, who is David's son, and he carries out the construction of the first temple. But at the dedication in 1 Kings, he says, "But will God really dwell on the earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I've built?" So Solomon knew that the divine could not be contained by a temple, which I think begs the question, then why'd you build the thing, right? The divine presence is everywhere in all things, and still we have this tendency maybe to believe that God is somewhere else. God is separate, holy, sacred, set apart from us. And maybe that's the church building for you. This is a beautiful, beautiful church. And you might come to this place with the mindset of, oh, this is where God is. I know for me, when I grew up in church, I went to churches that really drilled into us as kids that this is God's holy house. So, in other words, they meant no running, don't touch anything, don't laugh, don't pew slide. If you know, you know. And basically, this is a fun-free zone because this is God's holy house, and you must respect it. You must come to it with reverence. But God seems to be saying over and over again, no, I can't be contained by a building. You don't come to me, I come to you. And we see that in the fullest expression through the one born in a barn, little town of Bethlehem, whose name is?
Yes, good job.
Gold stars.
That's usually a good answer in church. It was a really good one right there. So we have in the person of Jesus an amazing answer to the question that Solomon asked, will God dwell on the earth? And in John 1:14, John gives us that answer, which I think you know. But in the book of John, in the first chapter of John, John refers to Jesus as the Word. Like in verse 1, he says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God." So when we go down to verse 14, when John says the Word, he's talking about Jesus. So here's what he says. "The Word," or Jesus, "became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." If you were a Jew in the first century and would read this and you came across that line, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us," the first thing you would probably think of is the tabernacle, because that's actually the word that's there. Jesus tabernacled into this world. Instead of God being present in a little building, God was now fully present in Jesus, the fully human, fully divine. And then John goes on to talk about the glory that they see in the one and only Son. Again, when that word glory comes up, it's the majesty, the magnificence, everything that God is. Even though it really wasn't visible, it was manifested in him and they could see it. They could see this glory that was present with them.
So the revelation of Jesus led the early church to start to embody this divine presence as well. So Paul writes to the church in Ephesus in Ephesians 2 and uses the imagery of the temple and says, "You are being built together as a dwelling place for God in which he lives through the Spirit." And in other words, that's saying you are a temple. You are a temple of the Spirit. Now, this is something I've heard a lot, and maybe if you've grown up in a religious environment, this gets used to say something like this. "Thou shalt not mark their body with tattoos, for your body is a temple."
Uh-oh.
Whoops. You can see we easily miss how profound this statement is. Paul is saying this to the church that is in Ephesus, which is home to this great, magnificent temple of the goddess Artemis, which was known to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And people would pilgrimage from all over to come and see this temple. Yeah. And so we even have a description from long ago.
From Antipater back at that time who saw it. And keep in mind, temples back then, people believed that that's where God or the goddesses resided. So Here's what Antipas says about this. I've set my eyes on the wall of lofty Babylon, in which is a road for chariots, and the statue of Zeus, and the hanging gardens, and the colossus of the sun, and the huge labor of the high pyramids. But when I saw the house of Artemis that mounted the clouds, those other marvels lost their brilliancy.
So Paul's giving them something that they can relate to. He's saying, church, wake up. You are a temple. You know that huge temple in your city, the one that's greater than the pyramids? You are like that. You are the place where the Spirit dwells. And even now in this room, if you look next to your neighbor, this is a person who is also divine. This is a person who carries the Spirit, who is the image of God, and that's really important.
Yes. So what does this mean in terms of how we encounter God? I think part of what we're saying here is you don't have to go somewhere. You don't have to be something. You don't have to become something or do something to experience God's presence, because God's presence is here within us, around us. And at the same time, we don't want to miss out on who God is. And I know in my own journey, I'm realizing more and more that one of the things I have missed in encountering the God who is the divine feminine presence. And what do I mean by that? Well, maybe one way to tell is through a story. When I was probably third grade or something like that, I went to one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska, and I got in trouble one day. And this didn't happen often, so I was just kind of frightened and terrified. And I think a bunch of the boys, well, there's only like 10 people in school. A few of us boys, I think we were throwing cow pies at the girls, if I remember right. So got in trouble. I go home. I'm just worried and upset and don't know what to do about all this, afraid of what's going to happen. And I still remember I had this snapshot picture of being in our living room in our farmhouse talking to my mom. And I probably spent more time with my dad and I had a great relationship with my dad. But there was something within me that knew perhaps my mom would be a little more understanding, a little more empathetic, a little more sympathetic, a little bit more compassionate about all of this. And I talked to her, and it really helped. And what can I learn from that experience? Well, if I encounter God, or He initiates with me, and my expectation is that He's fully male, I'm not going to experience the God who is. I'm going to experience a part of who the God who is. And I think part of what we're saying here is, what does it mean to embrace fully? So it's not a misunderstanding of who God is, or an imbalanced view, or an inadequate view, but rather a true view of who God is. And one of the verses I point to in this is in Zephaniah. I know it's your favorite book of the Bible. So Zephaniah 3:17. I've actually preached on this once, and it's an amazing little verse, I should say. And it's very simple. It says, "The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In His love He will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing." And so we all have mental pictures and metaphors about who God is like. And for this one, for me, it was, well, God's a mighty warrior. But before that, it says God is present. So God is present. How is He present? He's present like a mighty warrior. And we want a mighty warrior. We want Braveheart on our side, right? And so we want that mighty warrior. But at the same time, then it goes on to say, He will take great delight in you. In His love, He will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. You know, and because the Scripture has been written by men in a patriarchal society, we kind of get that, it's going to, even though it's God-inspired and human effort combined in this amazing thing we call the Bible, there's going to be some unintended bias, if you like to say it. So some of the pronouns might be a case of that. So I've always looked at this verse as, yes, God's Braveheart, the mighty warrior, and God's looking over me, and He delights in me and loves me and sings a song over me. But I've shifted my picture. I now read this, and I pictured the mighty warrior, Braveheart, but then it switches to a woman, maybe an aunt or a grandmother or a mother, holding a baby, just delighting in that baby and singing a song over that baby and just loving that baby. And I think it's helped me encounter the God who is, to have a more balanced perspective on who God is.
And I have encountered the divine feminine, especially through the story of Hagar, which is found in Genesis 16. And I'm particularly drawn to her because she was a woman of color, a slave in Abraham's household, likely from Egypt, disconnected from her family. And before my great-grandmother Gigi passed, she was able to trace some of our family and collect some of our stories of the people in our family who were slaves on plantations and may have narrowed it down to where they might have been living. And in those days, it was not out of the ordinary for slave owners to sexually assault slave women and sometimes have children by them. And this was the story of Hagar. So as the story goes, Abraham is promised to have a nation of descendants, and Sarah, his wife, is unable to have children. And so Sarah and Abraham talk, and their plan is that they will conceive their first child through Hagar, and in order to preserve their family line. So Hagar gets pregnant, and Sarah becomes very jealous and treats her with such contempt that she flees for her life. She runs away into the desert. And it says that the angel of the Lord sees her suffering, comes to her, and gives her a blessing. And some of the Jewish scholars believe that this is a moment of the Shekinah glory, this embodied presence that comes to Hagar. And she responds by giving this glory a name. In verse 13, it says that she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. This phrase, you are the God who sees me. God's presence comes to her, enters into her suffering, and doesn't leave her there. God blesses her. And I remember my story of you are the God who sees me. I remember the night that I got a phone call that my younger brother was shot and killed, and I had to be the one to wake up my mother and contact our family members. And we just sat in that bed and cried for hours. And as the day went on, as the sun came up, word got to our other family members and friends, and they poured into our house. We didn't leave that apartment for about a week, and it was our community who responded to our needs. So they did things like pay our bills, bring us food, make sure things were in order, clean things. But I remember the friends who just sat there and witnessed to my pain and just sat there and cried with me. And for me, as a way of coping and escaping, like I needed to get out, I took over, I had this hyper-controlling mode. So I took over the funeral service and the burial service, and once those services were over, I was kind of left with nothing. I had to face my pain. I had to enter into that grief. And something at that time that I kept saying to myself, kind of as a mantra, is God with us, God with us. And I think partly I said that because I wasn't so sure, and I needed to believe that, and I wanted to believe it so much. And I can see now, reflecting, is that God is the God who sees me. She was the one who entered into my pain, especially through the body of my community. Those who came and never left our side. I was teaching fourth grade at the time, and the way that my students and their families responded to us, there was a weight of presence. I am with you. I am the God who sees you. And so I share my encounter with the divine presence because I know that there are some of us in this room who are going through something really difficult, and you need to hear that God is the God who sees you. You might feel so tired and ready to give up, and you've given your all, but God is the God who sees you. God sees you. God comes to you. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but please know today you are seen and you are loved. The divine presence is here and often right around us.
Yeah. And that's what we want to experience more and more as a community of people who desire to know and follow God. If the band wants to come up now, we're going to close. And what we want to do is give you a chance to have a little bit of a experience of this. And we're going to use a poem that Paige found called God, Our Mother by Allison Woodard. And I know anytime we even bring up the idea of mother, it can be hurtful and painful for some of us, and we just fully recognize that. But we're using this poem as a way to look at who God is. Because we know that if we are made in His image, how we relate and what we do tells us about God. And so please use this poem as a way to reflect on a better understanding, a more complete understanding, a more balanced understanding of who God is. But not just to reflect on it, but actually to engage with and encounter and relate to the God who is.
To be a mother is to suffer, to travail in the dark, stretched and torn, exposed in half-naked humiliation, subjected to indignities for the sake of new life.
To be a mother is to say, this is my body broken for you. And in the next instant, in response to the created's primal hunger, this is my body, take and eat.
To be a mother is to self-empty, to neither slumber nor sleep, so attuned you are to the cries in the night, offering the comfort of yourself and assurances of, I'm here.
To be a mother is to weep over the fighting and exclusions and wounds your children inflict on one another, to long for reconciliation and brotherly love, and when all is said and done, to gather all parties, the offender and the offended, into the folds of your embrace, and to whisper in their ears that they are beloved.
To be a mother is to be vulnerable, to be misunderstood, railed against, blamed for the heartaches of the bewildered children who don't know where else to cast the angst they feel over their existence in this perplexing universe.
To be a mother is to hoist onto your hips those on whom your image is imprinted, bearing the burden of their weight, rejoicing in their returned affection, delighting in their wonder, bleeding in the presence of their pain.
To be a mother is to be accused of sentimentality one moment and injustice the next. To be the receiver of endless demands, absorber of perpetual complaints, reckoner of bottomless needs.
To be a mother is to be an artist, a keeper of memories past, weaver of stories untold, visionary of lives looming ahead.
To be a mother is to be the first voice listened to and the first disregarded, to be a mender of broken creations and comforter of the distraught children whose hands wrought them.
To be a mother is to be a touchstone and the source, bestower of names, influencer of identities, life giver, life shaper, empath, healer, and original love. So as we take a moment for some time of reflection and response, our invitation to you is to take this thought of what is this divine feminine presence that is all around us and within us.
Yeah, one of the ways that we invite you to participate is through communion. And communion today, as we gather, recognizes that this whole thing is a temple, that the divine presence is everywhere. And as we gather, this bread and this wine are holy because all of life is holy. And it's this ritual of taking the bread and wine that opens our eyes, that heightens our senses to the divine that is all around us.
So we invite you, if you would choose to come, and there are other ways that you can respond during this time. If you choose to come, it's an open table. The bread is gluten-free, the tall goblet is wine, the shorter one is grape juice. And may you experience more of the God who is.